Hello and welcome to another episode of ICS Cyber Talks. And today it would be in English. I ask my guest to do that in English because I believe that the subject is very important and can help a lot around the world dealing with the OT that is the main issue of this podcast. So I'm glad to have Rafael Maman, also known as Rafi. I hope that I can call you Rafi.
Yeah, that's too far.
VP OT and security at Sygnia. Hello, Rafi.
Hello. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure.
I appreciate that. And I would add also a dear friend. So we have our way of starting, and usually it's by asking the bio of our guest. So please give us a bit about your history, about what you are doing.
Okay. So like you already said in the introduction, I am Vice President for OT Security at Sygnia. I'm sort of sure that some of your audience would go something like Sygnia what? And so I want to tell you guys that you are not alone. Sygnia is a small company, but already with a very impressive global footprint. Today we have offices in Tel Aviv, in New York, London, Singapore, Mexico City, and recently also in Sydney in Australia. The company, there was an article that named it the Delta Force of Cybersecurity by the Forbes magazine, and for a reason, because it has a very low public footprint and was growing mainly by recommendation. So those that didn't know, you're not alone. We'll talk later about what OT Security Vice President is doing. So I'll leave that for later. Before joining Sygnia some 9 months ago now, I was the leader of OT security in the Global Cyber Impact Center of PricewaterhouseCoopers and the OT security leader of PwC EMEA, practically setting up this practice from scratch. The first 25 years of my career, which I spent outside of Israel, my own country, was mostly with Shell, the oil and gas multinational. I started in advanced process control in the company's R&D center in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and then many years implemented advanced process control innovations in a lot of the company's refineries. Worked in Singapore, in Europe, of course, New Zealand, South Africa, United States. So I had my bit of globetrotting. Then shifted my focus to what was then called secure digital supply chain management, and was Shell's principal in this area. So that's for Shell. In between, I had a stint being the CEO of a boutique consulting company that focused on the energy sector, critical infrastructures, and a very interesting period with the healthcare, hospitals in particular.
Very nice and very impressive, especially if you're talking about in Israeli eyes. I don't know how, but we managed to get to all those positions worldwide.
It's called chutzpah.
Chutzpah, yeah. Totally agree with you. So, as you said, you are many, many years with the ICS and OT cyber industry, and with OT at all. What are the significant changes that are taking place over the years?
It's a good question, Nachshon. I think the advantage of spending one's entire career in operational technology, you actually get a chance to look at big transformation processes from a bird's view. So I'll use that almost in effect reviewing my own career and look at the threat landscape. This is what basically changed. Look at the OT threat landscape over the last 40 years. If we start with the first ever recorded attack on an ICS environment, that on the Trans-Siberian natural gas pipeline, widely attributed to the CIA. By the way, the attack itself was successful. The pipeline was fractured and then exploded.
Mm-hmm.
This was in 1982. And in the period that followed, a long period, but mainly after 1995, that was after Microsoft released as freebie the TCP IP stack as part of Windows and ushered in everything cyber. If you look at those years, the threat landscape was dominated almost entirely by individuals. In many cases, insiders, and in many cases with direct access to the ICS and the process control environment. Just to position you in time, there were many, but one that many remember is an Australian guy that was denied a job with a water treatment facility and as a result decided to take revenge and attack that facility no less than 40 times, spilling wastewater to the environment, causing an environmental damage. And there were more of those. But that was the threat landscape. I'll get to what that means in a bit. That changed pretty much overnight. In mid-2010, with the discovery of Stuxnet and then its siblings, Flame and Duku and the rest, and we woke up to a different world, a world in which the threat landscape was now dominated by nation states, putting large budgets, highly qualified teams to develop what I call cyber weapons. It's nothing less than that.
Yeah, of course.
And for a period of about 10 years, this is what we knew. This is what we saw. Big attacks, whether it's Unit 74455 of the GRU in Russia, Unit 32 of the NSA in the US, or my own unit, 8200 here in Israel, of course, what you would call the cyber supernations. And they were developing highly sophisticated weapons that were deployed also successfully in Iran or in Ukraine or in Saudi Arabia, even in Germany. And we responded to that threat landscape. Now, the point is that also that changed. A few years back, and it's not that we don't see anymore the individual hackers or insiders. In Spain, just last year, 2 employees of a nuclear facility disabled the national radiation alert system. So that's still there, and we still see some activity of nation states, not as before, but we see that. Pipe Dream last year is a very good example. Skimmerish Israel, Iran is going on all the time. But if you look at the threat landscape today, then to a very large extent it's dominated by a different kind of threat. And this is what I want to call industrial grade ransomware. Attacks on the IT that put at threat the OT, if only for the reason that executives simply don't know whether there has been a cascading event from the IT into the OT, and because they don't know, in many cases they pay ransom, in many cases they are forced to halt operations. And if you ask me, the average listener to the podcast right now, this is what keeps him or her awake at night. Again, it's less so the national threat. There is some residual threat coming from the war in Ukraine, of course, but it's not even close to what we expected. And the thing that puts the industrial enterprise at risk, it is this new threat landscape. So to summarize, it is this change, the shifting, transforming threat landscape, bringing us to where we are today. My point is that many of us in the community haven't realized that, and we are still stuck somewhere in the past.
Yeah, more than that, I believe that today even nations would prefer using cybercrime groups. Cybercrime groups today have the same capabilities that nations have. It's no more
to a large extent, yes.
Yeah. Sygnia is a well-known IR PT company and IR and PT company. I have the honor that my son is working over there.
Should be careful, especially because your son is working there. PT, we are not doing the one of
well, it's not PT, it's red teaming. A lot of our listeners don't really understand the difference between red teaming and PT, and I would be glad if you can talk about that a bit longer. But Sygnia is working, for my best knowledge, with the top 100 of the 500 Fortune. It's a very boutique company, very trained company, and I remember when my son started over there, he was always kidding about the idea that the guys are always with the suitcase in the office because they don't have a clue when they are going to fly and where.
Especially the incident response guy.
Yeah, of course. So, what is your actual role in Sygnia? Because OT is something new over there.
Again, good question. I'll explain. I'll explain what my role is, but maybe in order to explain what a VP OT security is doing in a company like Sygnia, let me start. Pick up the thread we just built with the reshaping threat landscape, and try and see what did we, as the OT security ecosystem, did in response to those transformations, and that will by itself define what I'm doing today. So if you look at the first, what I call transformation, in which attackers had a direct access insider into your ICS and OT, what can you do if somebody can, get directly to your process control environment? You can't do much. Pretty much all you can do is to work on hardening your PLCs, improving their security, improving protocols. And that is pretty much what we did. Now, we all in the community like to complain a lot about the vendors, but those vendors did excellent work in those years in exactly that, in looking at PLCs, looking at protocols. The switch we now take for granted on every controller, on most of the controllers, shifting from run to program to test mode, which I believe is a great innovation, putting a physical stop to attacks, was invented in this period as a response to that threat landscape. Adding a TCP IP layer to Modbus, now taken for granted, is another result of this effort. So a lot of work was done at the lower end. Then, like I said, we woke up overnight to a different world. Highly sophisticated threat actors, nation states, doing big cyber weapon type attacks. What did we do? Well, frankly, what we first did is we panicked. I don't know if you remember. We literally panicked and not for nothing. I mean, suddenly we faced something we didn't know what to do with it. After we finished panicking, I think that the next thing we did is we went all the way to the extreme. We picked up a very simplistic model, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, called the Purdue model.
Course.
And implemented almost literally, because we discovered that's something amazing. This Purdue model actually splits the enterprise in two areas, two geographical areas. If you look down in level 0 to 3, it's in the control rooms at the manufacturing floor. And then levels 4, we later added 5, is back office, main offices, sometimes in different geographic locations altogether. And so the immediate interpretation was to split the enterprise, to disconnect the OT, and we even had a beautiful word for that. We air-gapped our OT and ICS, or at least we thought we are air-gapping our OT and ICS. And most of the activity in those 2 years, people did numerous projects, but at the core, it was network separation and segregation and creating a perimeter security, isolating the OT. Now, what's the point? The point is that now the threat landscape changed. And because the industrial enterprise cannot stop digital transformation, then more and more demand came on us, the OT security professional, to allow some sort of digital transformation, a minimal sort of digital transformation. So, in other words, communication between level 3 and level 4. And so we build up more and more and more complexity on top of our OT security and ICS security. And in cyber there is a very simple rule: the more complexity you add, it's the better for the attacker.
Yeah, of course.
The attack surface expands, deepens, and that's exactly what happened. And now we're faced with a new transformation. The threat vectors are coming from the IT, and that connectivity between them that we could not prevent, we could not air gap, is now the main source of headache, because we don't know anymore whether there has been a cascading effect into the OT or not. And so, in the face of that new threat landscape, there is no other way to protect the industrial enterprise. You got to look at it holistically, across IT and OT as one thing. You cannot live in islands anymore. This is a privilege of the past. And so, what does an VP OT security does in Sygnia? I am the man with a hammer. Literally, almost literally, not literally. I walk with a big hammer and I break down walls. I break down walls between IT and OT across Sygnia's service offering. Now, look at incident response. Today in Sygnia, we do incident response across the board, IT and OT as one team. That may sound trivial to some laymen, but all but.
Oh, no.
All but. If you look at famous events, even Colonial Pipeline, everybody talks about it. How many know that Colonial ended up hiring 2 IR companies, and 2 very good IR companies? They hired Mandiant, competitors, but still very good. Mandiant to deal with the IT, and Dragos to deal with the OT. And I am 100% sure that each one of those 2 did an excellent job in its own domain. But the CEO of Colonial, what he wanted is to know whether there has been a pivot from IT to OT. So that doesn't cut it anymore. If you want your incident responder of choice to look across the enterprise. So that's what we did. We do that. We spoke about Red Team. When I mentioned different than penetration test, Red Team is a goal-driven exercise, more extensive. It goes deeper. You identify what are the crown jewels you need to attack, and you go and attack them in any way you want. It's not a mapping of vulnerabilities or anything like that. So even our Red Team today doesn't stop at the DMZ. I mean, why would it? Would the attacker stop at the DMZ? No, so we continue too. We do it in a very controlled way. We do it by adding operators to our Red Team. So we take somebody from the client side out of operations for a couple of weeks. He joins the Red Team, and they do it together. And guess what? We haven't invented it. If you look at the way Sandworm 74455 in Russia is working, it's the same thing. They have operators on the attack team. So we do the same, and we do it again in a controlled way with a very clear decision-making, rules of engagement, but we don't stop at the IDMZ. And you can go on. We do posture assessment across the enterprise. We even do monitoring and detection and response in our newly launched service, MXDR, across the enterprise. This, again, may sound trivial, but it's not. If you look at all the MDR solutions, they're all IT-based endpoint solutions.
Right.
Now, we are not an endpoint solution. Our technology called Velocity started from IR and forensics tool, and so we are not limited. And so we deploy our agents deep into the OT, and then we connect to professional IDS technologies to complete and give a full picture to our analysts. All in all, that's what I'm doing. I'm breaking walls, and so far we have broken all the walls within Sygnia, and now I can really say that we provide a consulting and incident response across the enterprise, IT and OT.
Sounds great, because...
Sounds difficult, but...
Yeah, one of the things that I'm telling all the time my customers, and it was good that you mentioned that... Yeah, about the PT. As I see it, when you're doing red teaming, the meaning is that you are inside and you have control about what you are doing. You're not just sending tools.
Absolutely.
And in OT, it's critical because to get some tool that is doing some activity and he's sending some script to the PLC and the PLC is doing a deny and shutdown, you can stop the full factory for that.
Of course.
Which is not the meaning. The meaning is more to do what is happening, but not that. But I have another question, which is very interesting for me.
By the way, before we go away from that point, some and those some are actually leading and the more trailblazing in the industry prefer to do a sort of a combination. You do a hands-on red team all the way to the industrial DMZ. And from there, you continue with what I would best call research. You research potential vectors. You analyze those vectors together with the client's people, including operational people. And together, you identify potential risks. You don't execute them. And that, by the way, is an approach that you look at oil and gas companies, they would prefer to do that. Despite all the safety measures you put on a modern red team. I mean, to the best of our ability, such an event you described cannot happen following our own methodology. But, mistakes can happen. And if you want to prevent them and bring them down to zero, then doing a semi-hands-on, semi-research could be the way to go. But to leave the OT out of scope is something I would vote against any day, because this is not what your attackers are going to do. And so you really need to, this thing is a philosophical thing in Sygnia. We bake the attacker's mindset into everything we are doing. I'm a great believer in training and education. And so if you look at executive training, which I think is one of the most important things to go and do today, the people are the key. If there is tomorrow an event that hits your enterprise and you are caught unprepared, it is going to be those executives that will be caught exposed. They'll need to make decisions. What do I do next? And for that, they need to train. And this training, everybody is doing, but doing in a very limited way. There is boardroom exercises, war games for ransom attacks all over. But is that the point? I just told you, I really need to push that point further. I told you about the colonial, but around colonial, within a space of 2 months, there were 5 big attacks that happened globally, mostly in the US, but not only. One was a Brazilian company. And if you look at those 5, you'll see something interesting. 4 of the 5 ended up paying ransom, and not a penny. They paid anything from $5 to $13 million, and we don't know the maximum, but we believe that's the range. And all those 4 that paid didn't know whether there has been a pivot from the IT to the OT. So the question in front of the executive was very simple. What do I do now? Should I shut down my factory and lose whatever you say now? If none of them was a refinery, but close to my heart, a refinery can lose $10-20 million for a day of halting operations. And against that, and a possibility to buy an asset, and I'm quoting here one of those executives that said, I can for $5 million buy an asset, and that asset can allow me to, continue my operations. And for not a second I'm recommending to do that. I'm just highlighting the pressure under which those executives are. And if they don't know, then they have a problem. One of the 5 didn't pay. And that one was the one that knew for sure that there has been no cascading effect from IT to OT. I think it speaks volumes, what I'm now telling you. And so these executives find themselves for the first time in their life in a decision-making process. They are very good in decision-making, but not in this process. And they need to start making decisions, so you better prepare them. Prepare them for the real world. The real world is that they will have to deal with OT, if only to answer that question. Has it gone to the OT, yes or no? Many of your and my friends would say that those ransomware attacks on IT that threaten the OT are not OT attacks. I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And I beg to differ, Nachshon. It's OT attacks par excellence. Look, we do incident response for living, and when our teams are coming to an industrial company, the first two questions they get is, has the OT been breached? One. Two, what should I do? Should I halt operation, yes or no? And these two questions are the defining questions of an OT event. So nobody can tell me that those are not OT events. They are. And so even in training, we now expand it across the enterprise. The IT, the OT, enterprise-wide training, war games, purple team exercises, they don't stop anywhere.
Very good. And I really think that today in our world, it can happen that it would be an attack that would be an OT attack.
Could happen, yes.
Which is okay. But probably it would be easier to the attacker to gain access through the IT.
Yes.
And not all the attacks are about data. There are attacks that are especially about shutting down the factory. It's about security. So
and safety.
And safety.
Yeah.
Of course.
I think it's a leverage. The reason that the industrial sector has been the most attacked sector for now 2 or 3 years running is just that they realize that those what we call cyber criminals are organizations, and they do their own intelligence, and they know their playing field, and they know that the pressure on the industrial CEO is far higher than on. And I'm not saying anything about I was about to say insurance company CEO. It's not good. It's not good when your client's data is being exfiltrated, and if there is a risk of exposing PII, all that is not good. But all that pales by comparison to your core money-generating machine, and that's your OT. And if that is at risk, then it's a different type of decision-making.
Yeah.
And they know that. And because they know that, they target industrial enterprise. So sure, on the way, they exfiltrate data, they do a second tier and a third tier, encryption. They do whatever need to be done, and sometimes they leverage that as a second and third wave in their attack. But their hope is that they'll get the money before that.
Yeah. And I would expose a little secret over here. I'm chasing you quite a while to do this podcast. First, you are more on the plane than at home. But you told me all the time, Nachshon, wait, Nachshon, wait, Nachshon, wait, until the moment that your article was going out. I'm talking about the future of OT security. And I was reading this article many times. Today I read it twice because I wanted to be more prepared.
Already a good reason to come here.
Yeah.
Wow, you made my day.
And
just to be clear, it's an article of 20 pages?
Oh yeah. And I would put the link to the article. It would be in the podcast description, because it's fair and straight, and I believe that it's very important to read, because even I was very surprised about some of the things that were written over there. So let's start with let's say highlights of the article.
Okay, highlights is a big word, but I'll try and
whatever you want.
Let me run through the main messages there. So the article is presumptuously titled "The Future of OT Security," and I'm not taking a distance from such a big title, because it is about the future of OT security. And I spent quite a length in the beginning of the article to explain why we are at the point of change. And let me share a little bit of that. It has to
Please,
do with
take your time. It's okay.
And it has to do with a lot of the things we already discussed, the changing of the threat landscape. What did we do? But specifically, it has to do with what did we do when we were faced with the massive post-Stuxnet world. And I said already that what we did is that we adopted the model. And there was a reason for that. The reason is that on both sides of the equation, and that is that the side of consultants that I'm coming from, and of tech entrepreneurs that went on to build a solution to address it. Both sides had a problem. The people that came to do that when OT security was born in earnest, very difficult to pinpoint a time. I keep on talking about Stuxnet, but to be very honest for myself, the coin dropped 3 years before that. And that was with when CNN aired in September 2007, aired footage of Project Aurora of the Department of Homeland Security in the US. Don't know how many remember that. But that project, you saw scientists in broad daylight attacking a 2.25 megawatt generator and dismantling it with a mouse and a keyboard. And so it was for many an eye-opener. So it was a move from the drawing board to reality. And then Stuxnet did that even further, and then later. And so people jumped into the fray, consultants and tech entrepreneurs, and those two camps brought in people that were very comfortable with what we call information security or IT security, either consulting to banks and the likes, or building software solutions to contain it. But they were IT people. Again, nothing wrong meant. They came from this world, both of them, and they needed some framework to underpin their concepts, so that they can stand in front of a client or in front of a venture capital investor and knowledgeably talk about the space, some theory. And then, a godsend, we had a moment of serendipity, nothing really, and discovered in the ocean of academic obscurity, this model developed by the Purdue University in West Lafayette, Virginia, at that point already 15 years earlier. Not for that purpose at all. It was a high-level reference framework for the industrial enterprise. Dividing the enterprise, for those that don't know, but I'm sure that everybody listening in now knows, to very simplistic 5 layers, where you start from the control layer, then the PLC layer and SCADA, then, going up the hierarchy. And they said, that's great. We have a model. It looks good. It has a scientific background behind it. What's more than the...
It makes sense.
It makes sense. And it's simple. It's simple. It's so simple that I can put any young consultant in front of a client and he can come across as an expert in the field. And indeed, I'm sure you remember, within no time, anywhere between slide 3 and 10 of any presentation in the world, you saw the Purdue model coming up.
Of course.
So then there was a process of adjusting it, because the model was invented when I started my own career in 1992, and it was old, and so it was adjusted. First thing added was IDMZ at the militarized zone. The concept then was borrowed from the IT world. The I is for industrial. And that's a good thing. So the network separation was an excellent move, and that was added through by implementing a DMZ. Second thing that we had to add is the internet. In 1992, there was no internet. So also in the original Purdue model, there was no internet applications, no enterprise internet applications. So that was added as layer 5. Why? Because it's easy. You build 0, 1, 2, 3, 5. But that's the key of the problem. By putting it at level 5, we started what I call straightforward our original sin. And let me explain. Because you get now a model, nice, with DMZ, with layer 5 on top of it, and you're going to use it. So the next thing we did is we developed the Purdue Bible. Again, my words. Consultants went first and came with the first commandment, which was, thou shalt never transfer data between level 4 and level 3. And then went on, and if that was not enough, and said, commandment number 2, thou shalt never use the internet on the manufacturing floor. Okay. The tech entrepreneurs at the other side look at that and say, hey, all our friends here are developing commandments for the Purdue model, we should follow. So we should too operate only in level 0 to 3. And so they added their own commandment, thou shalt only operate on-prem. Then they looked and said, hey, but if we are limited to work only on-prem, what the heck can we do? Not a lot. And came their fourth commandment, thou shalt only develop intrusion detection systems. And then later they saw that it's not so trivial to do intrusion detection in an OT environment, so they added to that and asset discovery. And indeed, asset discovery, important by its own right, became the most selling component of IDS providers until today. So with those 4 strict rules or commandments in the Bible, we made it very difficult for the industrial enterprise. And why I call that the original sin is that when all that was brought to practice, we already knew that cloud is the king in the making. We already had industrial IoT and IoT proliferating at exponential rates. We knew it's never going to hold water. And by placing the internet at layer 5 and blocking communication up and down, and later we allowed some communication up with unidirectional diodes and other tricks. But in principle, we wanted to block communication. We made the industrial enterprise jump through hoops if they wanted to implement any digital transformation process. Now, in that blog post that I posted, I took as one example something that was key to the digital transformation of at least the process industry, and that was changing the orientation of managing supply chains. We managed our supply chain from the Industrial Revolution and until the early mid-90s in what can best be called a supply-driven supply chain. You manufacture as much as you can, as efficient as you can, put it in stock, use sales and marketing to sell it. Why? Because we couldn't do any better with the technology that we had available. But then technology became available, both computing and communication, and we could do something remarkable to turn this on its head and drive our supply chains from the demand side. Respond to demand signals all the way down to changing what you are producing and even what raw materials you are purchasing, which is a revolution. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, big companies invested tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in transforming their supply chain to be responsive to demand signals. And so benefits coming out of it. The best example is Dell, of course.
Yeah,
implementing
of course.
a zero
So well
inventory.
known. It's learned all over the world in universities.
Absolutely. Zero inventory is the classical demand-driven supply chain, and a whole lot of new processes came in, ERPs, enterprise execution systems, demand fulfillment, demand forecasting, demand management. All that was huge investment. And then came we. Then came Stuxnet and all the rest, and this network separation, and we told them that's not possible, guy. You cannot transfer data between 3 and 4, because at the core of all those transformation is communication between levels 3 and 4. So we put it on hold. We didn't stop it, but we put it on hold, and we delayed it, and and I truly believe that we introduced a delay of years in innovation in the industrial enterprise. The whole world is digitally transforming itself, and they are behind. They do a lot, but not enough. And a lot of that is because of cyber securing the OT assets. And so here comes the second part of what I wrote about, and that is that you don't become an executive in ExxonMobil or in Shell to keep on hearing this is impossible for too long. At some point, you're going to come, get the guys around the table, tell them, listen, guys, this is what we're going to do. we're going to put industrial IoT, we're going to put internet on the manufacturing floor, and you just tell me how to do it securely. That's your job. And so as a result of that, we started building more and more and more complexities around it to facilitate some of it. And again, the industrial enterprise, and I'm focusing in my article about the process industry, which is the core of the industrial enterprise, they can't wait for us, and they can't work with this complexity, so they take their own initiatives. And the one that I'm focusing in particular, there are a couple, but one that is, in my opinion, by far leading is re-architecting and the what we call industrial control systems, the process control environment from the ground up, changing it. Such that you replace, and I know I'm saying big words for some, replace PLCs with edge devices. And if you don't want to replace, and in our industry, it's going to take ages before we replace.
Of course.
You wrap them with those edge devices. The edge devices communicate with the central bus. And on that bus, anything can communicate as long as it complies with the standard. So the cloud can communicate, IoTs can communicate. There is a central processing unit that takes all this data and processes it. And so suddenly you turn OT into IT in terms of agility. I have a poster in my room that shows a truck running in the mud, and it says OT security, and then you see Formula One. Max and Checo driving for in one of the F1 races for Red Bull, and this is IT security. So I want to bring Max and Checo to OT security, and it's not me. So the whole initiative is not about security; it's about re-engineering the industrial control systems and the control layer. But it has a very strong security element. When this happens, OT security will be redefined and will never be again the same as it is today, because we need to work differently. We'll need to work similar to the way we work in...
A lot of times we forget that the main initiative of the companies is to earn money.
Of course.
And for earning money, you need to go across the organization and do a lot of optimization. Now, there are times that it's prosperity, so it's going a bit down. But if we are coming to those days,
yes,
for every nickel,
yes,
every cent, everybody
yes, no doubt,
is struggling. And a lot of times, and I'm totally with you, the idea that we as cyber experts are saying, no way, it's not the way it should be.
I agree.
The idea is, tell me what you need, and I would find the solution.
Yeah, by the way, that new approach, I didn't mention, but it's a result of an effort initiated by ExxonMobil already 6 years ago, called the OPAF, the Open Process Automation Forum, and their standard is called the Open Process Automation Standard, complies with the 62443, and so it is secure, the best we can have today. I mean, always you can do better, and it has all the security built in. True, not everybody likes that future. I agree. But it is the future.
So, your article was described in some manners as very provocative.
That's exactly the point, yes.
Because what we are saying is very simple. Guys, we went to the easy way. We went to the Purdue model. It was easy for everybody to gain the expertise and to go into the game. And if you would go with the OPAF, it would be much harder, because it's harder to explain to a CEO or CFO
I'll address this provocativity you are talking about in three layers. I'll try to do it quickly because we don't have all day.
We have all day.
So first, don't underestimate these forums. I mean, I've been looking after OPA for 6 years, but by now it's an organization. It's a forum that includes 600 companies and pretty much any company in the world that counts. Everyone, from all the oil and gas majors to all the chemical companies, all the big manufacturers, all the IT companies, whether it's Microsoft, Amazon, IBM, everybody, all the consulting companies, regulatory and standard organizations, they are all members and active members. So it has a volume. And when you look at the names there, they carry a lot of weight in the industry. That's one. Second, in the same context, ExxonMobil is putting their money where their mouth is. So they don't only talk. They actually initiated last year a project to convert one of the refineries in the West Coast in the US to be entirely OPAS compliant. And that's a big thing. You talk thousands of IOs. And so if this is successful, and it will be, by the way, Yokogawa was selected as the integrator, then others will follow. So that one. Second, when you say provocative, I dare challenge it and say that it's, it's not the core of our community. And the reason I allow myself to say that is that I gave a talk on the topic in the recent S4 in Miami a couple of months ago. And to get a speaking position in S4 is already a recognition.
Yeah, it's a very big honor.
I agree. And to get a talk on the topic called the future of OT security is almost unheard of because the whole conference is about the today and the now and what we do tomorrow. And still, I got that slot. And the thing that made me suddenly, step back and look at it was that this talk that I gave was got awarded the most attended session. And now this has nothing to do with me. And the reason I'm saying that is that all those, the hundreds that attended the session and stood at the back at the doors, they didn't know what I'm going to talk about, right? They knew the title and a short summary, and they didn't know me. So it's not me. It's the topic. And I'm saying that most of our community really desperately wants to know what's next. And really know that we cannot go on like that. We need to change. And if there is a talk in the gold-plated conference of OT security, 1,200 people in Miami that talks about the future, they come en masse and they listen and they feedback. So that's the core of our community. Now, having said all that, yes, I'm almost willing to guess or to bet that those that find it provocative are of the vendor side of the equation that have been selling this old technology for ages. And here I need to tell you something that crossed my mind, and it has to do, because both you and I have seen it for a while. I said already that I started my career in 1992, and I think it was very special here. First, we celebrated a few things. I started in advanced process control, and so we celebrated the PLC was celebrating 25 years old. And the DCS, its younger sibling, celebrated at that time 10 years old. So there were big celebrations, but also the world had big events. The Soviet Union disintegrated. The old Soviet republics became independent. The World Wide Web in 1992 came online as a service on the internet. In Finland, the G2 protocol for GSM communication changed the world of mobile telephony. Big things happened. And then, from then until today, the world has changed. Literally, figuratively, the world has changed. It's not the same world. Russia closed the full circle, before being a democracy in the middle and economic superpower, and all the way back to the dark side now. Look at what the World Wide Web and mobile telephony did to the world. It changed it altogether. Look at technology. When I started, I was involved in a cutting-edge project to implement neural network to advanced process control in a refinery, and it had 10 to 20 parameters, and it was cutting edge. It was literally cutting edge. ChatGPT had 175 billion parameters today, as a result of which my kids stopped doing homework altogether. So, the whole world changed And one thing didn't change, and this is our celebrations. Today we celebrate 55 years anniversary for the PLC, and we celebrate 30 years birthday for the DCS, and there are still the technologies that are being used. They are still the core of our critical infrastructures and manufacturing. And it's the same vendors that sold that a few years back. They still sell it today, and they still make the bulk of their balance sheet from this kind of legacy hardware. So, of course, they will try to squeeze the last cent of selling it. And, of course, they will find my article provocative. I understand that. I even sympathize with it. But that's not enough. And if you look at the OPA forum I mentioned, all of them are members and active members. Rockwell and Siemens and GE, they're all active members. And they all realize that at some point it's going to end, and they want to be part of the new one.
So I'm urging everybody to go and read this article. Really, first of all, it's written in a very easy way to understand.
I'm blushing.
It's okay, you can blush, but it's a wonderful one. And I believe that even people that are not coming from the cyber can find themselves very easily over there. So we were talking about the past. We were talking about the future, which we can't know exactly when it would happen. Where we are heading with all the idea of the OT security.
Okay. First of all, with your permission, I think we need to time frame this question, because it's very easy to put long-term predictions, and it's even nice. But it's not really practical for us, the practitioners. So I suggest to put a 5-year time frame, and I'll
of course
happily answer. Because in the industry, in the process industry, trying to predict more than 5 years reliably doesn't make sense. So if I look at the coming 5 years, first thing that will not change is the threat landscape. I talked a lot about the current transformation, which I call industrial strength ransomware. The hackers, the cyber criminals discovered our vulnerability, discovered the sheer complexity we build around our OT systems, which I said, and I'm saying again, for them is godsend. And they are going to leverage it. So I see that only continuing and intensifying. So the threat landscape will not change. Other thing which I believe started and will not change, a trend you can call it, is folding OT security up into the CISO organization and get away with the islands of accountability, where the responsibility for OT is with operations and with maintenance.
Yeah.
I should say that the large multinational companies are already far done with this process. You see that now getting to the second tier, and in the coming 5 years, I see that also being implemented in second tier, which is large and mid-sized companies. So that both of those will stay the same. The one thing that will definitely not change is the risk averseness of the process industry. I've been there all my life. I think that this is part of our modus operandi. We are risk averse, and so this will stay for the coming years. But there is another thing about the industrial enterprise. Risk averse as we are, we love others to take the risk. And so that's what we do. If there is a trailblazer that is willing to take the risk and try out and experiment with new innovation, we'll cheer this guy, this company, stand on the sideline, see what's happening, study it, and the moment it's successful, we'll move en masse into the play. And so if you ask me what's going to happen in those 5 years, it's exactly that. We'll see more trailblazers joining ExxonMobil in trying to implement new architectures for the ICS and OT. I mentioned OPAF. There is another one called Namur. The two are now being integrated. And we'll see more and more of those trailblazers, and then will come the first movers. And if you in 5 years' time, I will see a lot of those first movers copying and implementing. And OT security will then change, at least for those working with those first movers. And this is also my objectives. We introduced a new line of a new service offering in Sygnia a while ago. which is aimed at offering our client to following them with the implementation and development of their strategies and in the transformation, their transformation into the new brave new world. And I want to be there for them. So I think we are, I don't know, to the best of my knowledge, we are perhaps the only premium consulting company that went that way. And I'm very proud of that. So this is the world in 5 years' time, in my view.
I want to take you for a couple of minutes to something else because I would like to get your view about it. Today we're talking about a lot of propriety. Okay, SCADA propriety protocols, PLCs, which are propriety with their framework and everything. On the other hand, we know that computing is coming into everything. So if I'm looking as an IT guy on the old days, okay, so you had the Unix, you had those propriety that was
not Unix, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, but it was shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking until it got to the Linux and Microsoft and maybe Android, of course.
Okay.
Do you see it happening in the PLC environment?
It's like in volleyball. You give me for a spike, right? I mean, partly what I'm discussing about the new protocols or the new standards like OPAS is exactly that. What they have at the lower end, it's called DCN, Distributed Control Node, and this DCN is an edge computer, and it's not anybody's edge computer. You program, it can do control logic, it can do entire control loops, but it can also implement security and can also implement protocols and whatever needed, and that's exactly what you want. However, yes, I see that happening outside of those new architectures altogether, if only because that's the way the world works. And so currently there is a lot of power held by the instrumentation and process control vendors, and it goes very far. You surely know that if I now want to do something that touches on that layer, I would risk invalidating my warranty.
Yeah, of course.
And the vendors would say, you don't touch that, that's mine. I can give you these kind of services, which I'm sure they can. But it's going to cost you. And there is a lot of resistance in the industry to this kind of position. Like if you are big, if you are BP or Shell or Exxon, then you can find your own way with your vendors. If you are small manufacturers, you won't. But slowly, those small gather power. And that power of the market will eventually get them to change, and we are not different. We are not different than other parts of the economy, where you see convergence that are led by pressure from the market. And so definitely you see that on some standards, you already see standardization happening. And
yeah, of course.
It will intensify, and you will see two processes. Those that really look far ahead into new architectures, and those that are forcing into some more workable standard.
I'm telling to my customer all the time. I'm saying,
yeah,
look, you have your golden minute with the vendors 1 second before you sign the contract. This is the only place that you can come and say, these are my terms.
Which is probably true when you change
vendors. Yeah, but a minute later, that's it. You're out of the game.
So I said we complain a lot. They do also a lot of good things, of course. You're right. Yeah.
So, Rafi, we came almost to the end. As I told you, it would fly. The time would fly.
It did.
And as always, I would like to finish with the question of what would you like the audience to take from this interview? And remember that we are talking not only for the cyber pros, we are talking also for managers, people that are not so aware of the cyber himself.
Okay. I want them to take away one thing. One thing, and I mentioned that before, and I'm saying it again. Break the walls. Break the walls between IT and OT. Now, whether you are an OT security professional, a CISO, an executive in industrial enterprise, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your employer to cyber secure your enterprise holistically across the digital estate, IT and OT as one. That really you owe to yourself to do. Air gapped OT is a myth. It's always been a myth, but now it's a myth. It's a known myth. And it's also known by your potential attackers. IT-OT convergence is a slogan of the past. It has de facto converged and a while ago. If you don't see that, you are putting yourself and your enterprise at risk. And so, as I said, the only way to protect, to cyber secure the industrial enterprise against the current threat landscape is by looking at it holistically across the digital estate, IT, OT, and therefore break the walls. Break the walls in the ways you do things, in your organizations, in your functions you define, and in the people you hire to help you do that. If we manage to deliver this one message, Nachshon, then I think we did something very good. And I really think that we helped having a better and more secure world. I don't kid you. I'm serious.
No, this is very serious. I'm totally agree with you. Rafi, thank you very, very much.
It was truly a
for
pleasure,
your time.
Sean.
Yeah, it was a pure pleasure, really.
We could continue like that for another hour easily.
Yeah. We would find it on the next time that you are going to have another article.
That's a deal.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.